Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masech Zevachim, Daf Tzadik, page 90. We are going to begin by the two dots, about 10 lines from the top, Ophos Kodman. So we learned in yesterday's daf, as we were introduced to this new parak, that anything which is more sanctified than the other, Kol HaMakudish Mechavero, Kodemas Chavero. It comes before its friend. And therefore, when it comes to, for example, Kachi Kadashim, come before Kachim Kalim, for the most part. And it gives other examples with regard to the Chatas and the Oyla. And then it tells us with regard to the bird, it says that Ophos Kodem Menachais, that a oaf comes before a flower offering, Neshe Mini Damim, because it at least has blood offerings attached to it. So on this, the Gemara asks, Adarabba, fakert, menachos kaidmois. Maybe the mincha should come first. Shekein yishin betzibur kibiyachin, because when it comes to a mincha can be brought as a carbon yachid and sometimes a carbon sibor. However, when it comes to an oath, that's something which is specifically designated to a carbon yachid. So if Yilhachim mini damim adifi. So it's true, there are certain qualities that make it a little bit unique, but nonetheless, birds are going to come first because of the blood piece. Minchas chayte, etc. So when it comes to a minchas chayte, the flower offering of a sinner is kaidem minchas nadava. That comes before a free will offering, neshu bal chet, because we want that person to be able to achieve kapara, and therefore we want that to come fast. So the Gemara asks again that because it's a chet, we don't accompany it with oil or frankincense. So that's only when it comes to a minchas chayte. However, when it comes to a minchas nadava, it does. So if we maybe should come first. If you'll hachi minchas chayte habal chet atifa de mechaperes. It's interesting language. Haba al chet means it's being brought due to a chet. Therefore, that's better because we want this person to achieve kapara. Iboilu. So now the question is minchas saite. So when it comes to a mincha of a saita, minchas nadava is behem kodemas. Now on one hand, minchas nadava kadma. Maybe the minchas nadava should come first. Shechein tuna shemen. It says but it should be ulavoina. We know, as we just said, a minchas nadava has wine and libations and frankincense. However, oil and frankincense. However, when it comes to the minchas saita, because it's through sin, she brought darkness into the world, so we don't have shemen, which brings light. We don't use lavaina for the same reason. It's a way to be able to clarify a sin and perhaps also bring shalom. So Tashma minchas chayte kodemas minchas nadava. We just said that when it comes to a mincha of a chayte, that comes before. But minchas chayte hu dekam, well minchas nadava. However, ha minchas chayte lo. It's mashma that minchas chayte will not come before. Now mikatani mipnei shehi mechaperes. It doesn't use language because it's mechaper. Meshi ba al chet. It's an important language that it comes because of some sin that was committed. Katani v'hanami ba al chet. And therefore, apparently, you can learn out that we could say that minchas saita is inclusive of that. And maybe that is not just a way to say it's not a disproof in the other side, but actually proves that perhaps it does come first. Tashma. Zu koidemis lezu. It's a little bit vague over here, but it says this comes before this. Okay, we'll understand what is this referring to. Why? Shizuba min achitin. This comes from wheat. Mizuba min hasairin. And the other one comes from barley. So ma'alav, what does it mean? It's probably talking about a minchas nadava or minchas saita, because a minchas nadava comes with wheat, and the minchas saita is barley because she acted like she was Isaac, like a maisa behema. So therefore, she brings barley, which is fit for animal consumption. So apparently, That's a raya that minchas nedava comes first. Lo, minchas chayta, minchas saita. It just means that minchas chayte, that which is of wool, of a wheat, comes before saita, which is barley. So typically, da mechaperes, so halo mechaperes. Maybe we should say the reason is because one is mechaper, one's not mechaper. Velomai, minchas nedava. Typically, the zu tu'una shemen l'vayna v'zu eno tu'una shemen l'vayna. If it's really talking about minchas nedava, then it should say the reason is because that minchas nedava has these qualities that it has shemen l'vayna. It doesn't say it. It's probably because it's not talking about minchas nedava. Ella chad mitrei taimi nokit. Rather, you can say one of a couple of answers does it provide. So there could be multiple reasons as to why this comes before the other. It mentions wheat before barley, but it could have also mentioned this reason as well. Okay. Chatas oiv kodemas. So the Mishnah concluded that said that when it comes to a chatas comes before an oila, and a chatas oiv comes before an oila sa'ov. Okay. And then it says, V'chein b'hakdisha. Rashi says, Kishuma farish is kinoi, when you designate the nests for the birds, karashem l'chatas tchila. You should designate the chatas first. So chatas comes before the oil. Okay. So now let's get into this. Chatas oiv kodemis. So min hanmili. Why would we say this also applies to birds? The pasuk says, V'hikr b'sasher l'chatas rishayna. It says in the pasuk, let's get the whole pasuk. V'hevi oisam elokoyin. It brings it to the koyin. V'hikri v'sasher l'chatas rishayna. It says you should do the chatas first. And it says umalak is rishai. Mul arpel v'lo yavdil, which is referring to the din of a chatas, that we don't sever it completely. And it's referring, again, obviously to a chatas of. So it doesn't need to say that you're makrib at first. We already know that this is the order of the psukim. The psukim tell us clearly that the first one's a chatas, the next one's an oila. It's coming to tell us a greater chiddush, that when it comes to any chatas, it will always become before an oila. Habayis imahen bein chatas oif oilos ov, bein chatas behema oilos behema. And here's the key. Here's the kicker. The afil chatas oif oilos behema. Even if you have just a bird, but it's a chatas oif, that will still come before the oilos behema. Hilkach therefore, chatas oif oilos ov. If you have these two miv'es hasheni, that we derive from the words es hasheni. Chatas behema oilos behema. Why does the chatas behema come first? Midiravi rachmana chatas oif oilos behema. Midiravi rachmana, because the pasuk includes it. Okay, there it adds to it. Right, there's a riboy in the psukim, as Rashi says. Let's look at this Rashi. The Sanyal El Ufar Sheni Ben Bakar, etc. Tika chatas. Okay, so we already have another pasuk to substantiate that point. And then here's again the key point over here is chatas oiv oilos behema. Even a chatas oiv goes before oilos behema mizeh binyav, from this binyav which we just saw. Tashma Rabbi Lezer oimer kol makoim shenis chalfa chatas kaidemas. So what does that mean? Let any time where there's an exchange of a chatas, says Rashi, the oivois boin tachteh b'dalos, and these birds come due to poverty. Going b'matama mikdash, someone who's tamei tumas mikdash v'kedasham. In that situation, the pasuk says the v'yikru chatas behema v'dalos nischalfa shtei toyrim. So it's an obligation having to bring two birds in that situation. V'kan oila kodemas. So before we get to that, so typically the chatas will come before. However, kan b'yoledes sha'oif tachas oila hu ba v'habehema ikar haisa. And we're regarding to a yoledes, the din is that the bird will come in the stead of an oila, and the behemoth is the ikr. Okay, so kol makom shabal chet. That's that. So kol makom shabal chet. Anytime it comes to a chet, chatas kodemas. The kan, but over here, because we're talking about a yoledes who does bring a chatas, but she didn't sin, she gave birth. Oila kodemas. So that's the chiddush. By yoledes, the din is different. Then oil comes before the chatas. V'chol makom shnayim boyim tachas chatas. Anytime when you have two coming in the stead of a chatas, says Rashi, Kagain b'matami mikdash shtei oifos, that you're again you bring two birds, tachas chatas, achas hein boyin. The two birds come because of one chatas, right? Shahari ba'ashirus lohoi mechuyev el chatas. So in that case, you have two birds. So chatas kodemas, the kan oila kodemas. But over here, by the oila sa'of of the oiledes, which is just brought as an oila, as an oil for an oila, in that situation, the oaf comes first. So it's a shtickle kasha that we find by yoiledes taka. Then oila sa'of comes first. Amarava lemikor hakdima hakasav. That this is basically what the pasuk is coming to tell you, to teach us this novelty. Tashma parim kaidim elim. Okay, let's go slow. Let's look at question 9. Question 9 says as follows: Lamai asa gimel mikrais. Why do we have 3 psukim to tell you about a chatas comes before an oila? So one is a chatas behema is before an oil's behema. One is a chatas oif comes before an oil's oif. And one is the chatas ov comes before oil's behema. Pretty obvious that would be the answer. Okay. Let's see if there's another question over here. Not yet. Question TB 13. Madua minchas chayte kodemes lo minchas soita. Why would a minchas chayte come before the mincha of a sota? TB 13. So one reason is, let's get this down, is because zu kodemus zu kodemus zu shazu ba min achitin v'zu min hasairin. So that's one reason. Okay. Did I write that? Bol chaper v'yeshem l'vayna v'minchas soita in shemen. Okay, this is not right because minchas chayte there is no shemen. This is wrong. There is no shemen l'vayna by minchas chayte. So by a minchas chayte, we said has is chita, is wheat, and a soita is sa'ira, is barley. Okay, that's one answer. The other answer is that typically the ha-mechaperes v'halo mechaperes, right? One is mechaper, right? Right, ha-mechaperes. I got the question completely wrong. Halo mechaperes. Okay, so that is TB 13. Let's make sure we have it written down cleanly. Okay, now let's keep going. All right. Tashma parim koidman le'elim. So if you have a par and you have an aisle, so the par, the bull, comes before the aisle, before the ram. The elim koidman le'kvasim. And a ram comes before the sheep. Okay, so that's just how it is. So the Gemara before, I want to make sure I said it is Lamikra Hakadima Hakasav Shtehi Nikris Be'inin Tchila Ava Ba'avoidasan Chatas Kodemas. So it's basically saying no, it's not true that really the Chatas comes first. Just because it's written oil first in the pasuk doesn't mean really that the Chatas should come afterwards. That's how it's explained. Lamikra Hakadima Hakasav. Even again, you would think that maybe not by Yoiledes for the various reasons. Okay. So again, a par comes before an aisle. Aisle comes before keves, kvasim l'seirim, and sheep come before Seirim. Okay. And my love, the Chag. So what does that mean? Says Rashi, Sadim and Beis. We're talking about the holiday, the Seirim Havi Chatas, the Musafi Chag, the Karbonos Musaf. On the holidays, on Yom Tiv, the Seir is a Chatas, and the Kvasim is an Oila, right? And what do we see? Taka, that the Kvasim come before the Seirim, which means that Kvasim were oilless. So apparently, oil will still come before Chatas when it comes to the Musafim. So our answer is Lo Linda Dava. Says Rashi Vishneim Oila. We're talking about where they're both oilous. Okay, but if you're right, that if we're talking about on the Chag, in which the Kvasim is an oil and the Seirim is a Chatas, we would bring the Seirim first. Okay, but when we said that this comes first, one comes before, is when they're all the same. They're all olos. Olos Nadava. Parim kaidul elim shechein nisrabu minisachim. The reason why parim go before is because there's a much higher amount of libation. Shechein elim likvasim. So too, when it comes to an aisle, the amount of libations is higher. Kvasim l'seirim shechein nisrabu ba'alya. The reason why kevis comes before the seirim is because the tail is also sacrificed when it comes to the kvasim. Tashma. Par Kayin Mashiach, when it comes to the bringing of the bull from the Kayin Gadol, that's Kayin Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor. That comes before the carbon, as we saw Wat Masaktas Horius, that if there is an erroneous mistake by the Beis Din, and because of that, people have to bring a special carbon, or maybe the Shevet does, is exactly who has to bring it is discussed. So the Kayin Gadol comes first. And this is actually discussed in Masechtas Horius. It's brought down the second paragraph over there. Kashir Saraf Hapar Harishon, when they burn the first one, Rishon Yehel Par Ha'edel Chol Masav. So it basically means that his comes first. Par Helm Davar Shel Tzibur Kadam Apar Avodas Kachavim. If there's again a mistake about Avodah Zara, so in that situation, the Par Helm Davar Shel Tzibur comes first. And Rashi says because that's a Chatos, and the Par Avodas Kachavim is an oila. Okay, and of course the chatzis comes here an oila. Par Avodas Kachavim kaidam l'seiri Avodas Kachavim. When it comes to the Par Avodas Kachavim, which is again an oila, that comes before the seiri Avodas Kachavim. Now the Afal Gav, and here's the key over here. We had this before in Horius. The Afal Gav the Par Avodas Kachavim oila, as we said. So maybe that shouldn't come first. Seiri Avodas Kachavim chatos. So we finally got ourselves a starka kasha. We do sometimes see that oil is brought before a chatos when it comes to the par avodas kachavim, which is an oila that goes before the siri avodas kachavim, which is a chatos. So the ema maresha, what you say for the resha, par helm davar shel tzibur kodem par avodas kachavim. So we could have said before also that when it comes to the par helam davar shel tzibor, right? The par helam davar shel tzibor, which again is brought over there, which that is that's kodem par avodas kachavim, right? So we see over there that what happens, that it comes before the par avodas kachavim, which again the par avodas kachavim is an oila, right? So b'chad mina mielo kamrinan, the chatas kadma. So b'chad mina, from one of them lo kamrinan, the chatas kadma. Ki kamrinan betray mini. We're talking about if we're dealing with two different animals, right? Over there we're talking about it's b'chad mina. It's the same min. Right, they're both bulls. It's both a par. So when you're dealing with a par and a par, all right, the par helam davar shel tzibor and the par avodas kachavim, so that we don't even talk about. We're talking about when there's two different types of animals. Ashkachan oil with the kadmol chatos. Even there, we find that an oil can come before the chatos. right? So it's true. Maybe there are times when oil comes before a chatas, but that's when there's two oilus. When they're both the same animal, they're both parim. How do we know that it's possible that way, even with two different animals? So we see this again by the par. We see this by the par of the avodas kachavim, which comes before the seiri avodas kachavim. They're two different animals, and nonetheless an oil comes before a chatas there. Sami merava mishmei the rava bar mari chatas avodas kachavim chaser echad l'chatas ksiv. It says it missing an aleph, right? It says l'chatas. For some reason, the word chatas over there doesn't have an aleph in it. So what exactly is going on over here? So let's look at Rashi. So b'parsha shlachacha v'haya ime'eni ho'edam nesesel shkaga, and so over there it says chaser aleph, that when it says the carbon chatas, it's missing something. Loimer she'enu kishar chatas. So the reason why it's missing an aleph is to tell you that it's different than a typical chatas. And normal chatas always comes before an oila. Shekol chatas shebatayra haboim oila chatas kodemes. So zu oila kodemes. It's telling you specifically as a hint the fact that there is no aleph over there in that situation. By the case of the avodas kachavim, that even though it's true that the seiri avodas kachavim is a chatas, but since it's written without an aleph, so that alludes to the fact that sometimes this particular chatas is not going to come first. Ravina Omer Kamishbat Ksiv Bahu. So it says the word Kamishbat, says Rashi Bahu Kra Umin Chaslei Benisko Kamishbat. Mashma Kamishbat Seder Mikro Kach Seder Vodasai. That the way it's written is also the state of the avoda, and the par is written first over there. So Hashal Zohachi Filotema Parim Dechag Nami Kamishbatam Ksibahu. Right? So it's the way it's written over there. So we asked this kasha before, that when we said that the parim is before the eilim, before the kvasim before the seirim, so we said on the holiday the seirim is a chatas and the kvasim is an oila, and you're telling me the kvasim is first, but kvasim is an oila. How's an oila come before a chatas? So again, kimishpatim ksibahu. That's just telling you, perhaps in that circumstance, the way that it's written, so is how we do it. In other words, it's an exception by the way that it's there's a custom as it's written that way. So again, normally a chatas is first. When it comes to avodah zara, oil goes before the chatas, only here by avodah zara, or you can say by the parim also. But there's a custom that's how it's done. As Rashi says, Umashma keseder ha'omer be'inyan v'seirim ksuvim achrayim. So the word seirim is written afterwards. So therefore, you're right. Normally, chatas comes first, but that's how it's written. Okay, let's look at question 10 and question. Well, let's get to the Mishnah. Yiboilhu chatas oiv oilus behema u'meiser. Now we throw in meiser behema in the mix. Now you have a chatas of oilus behema. Now, typically, as we said so far, the chatas of comes before the oilus behema. Now you have meiser behema. So eis behen kaidim. So tikdom chatas oif. Maybe you should say the chatas of still goes first. Ika meiser de kadamla. But how about meiser behema? That perhaps should come before it. So let meiser behema come first. Ika oilus behema. So oilus behema should come before meiser behema. The kadmale. So tikdoim oilus behema, ika chatas of the kadmala. We know it's almost like rock paper scissors. We know that chatas of an oilus of comes before a chatas of. We know that meiser behema comes before oilus of. We also know that chatas ha'ov should come before meiser behema. So then, how do you do it? So hachatirgim min zevach adif. That the min zevach is more chashav. Says Rashi, v'yakdim meiser. Better that you should have an animal like meiser behema goes first. The yafagav chatas v'oila, yachak chatas v'oila. The ilu oilus behema will matzi kadmul chatas oiv migzeres akasav. The oilus behema cannot come before a chatas of, so it has to be the chatas of, then the oilus of. However, the meiser behema comes first. B'merava amri ayla ba'oilus behema b'chatas ha'of v'agvasim ha'maiser. Says Rashi, Sheba ima. So they two come with each other. V'yichashuva b'maiser. Oilus behema and chatas of and chatas of are kind of linked together. She kaddish kadashim v'kol, because when it comes to the to the chatas and the asham, the chatas and the oila, they're both kadashim kachi kadashim, and therefore, and we know that the Xeris Kasav, that the chatas ov comes first, and maybe it should be even ahead of the min zevach. Vagma meiser levatel chashivuso shem min zevach shaboy. So the fact is that it should precede the meiser behema. So it's not so clear what the answer is. Possibly that meiser behema does not come first, even though it is a min zevach. However, the fact that they're both kadashi kadshim as opposed to meiser behema, which is kadshim kal. Okay, all right. Now let's look at a couple questions. Question 10. Parim elim seirim kavasim shel oilus nadava mikad mami umatam. Okay, so let's go slow. Parim, go before an aisle. Seirim. Oh, so you have this order. So parim, then you should have ayolim, and then after an aisle, it says you should have kvasim, and then seirim. Okay, so that's the proper order. Umahatam. So par kodem ayil, the chain ayil lekeves, and the reason is because the nesachim are more. Keves should come before the seir because it's not nisrab of alya. Because when it comes specifically to the keves, we also sacrifice the tail, and therefore because of the tail, that extra chashivas of the tail, that's why it comes first. Question 11. So one we talked about when it comes to the chatas of avodas kachavim, par avodas kachavim, that will come before the seir of avodas kachavim. Even though the par avodas kachavim is an oila, the seir of avodas kachavim is a chatas. And also, kvasim de mustafi hachag, we said the maskana comes before the seiri hachatas, even though the kvasim, as we said before, the kvasim is an oila and the seirim is a chatas. Nonetheless, that's the order, and we said because it's a gzeres hakosav. So those are the two times we find that. Question TA10: Is oila kodemas l'chatas l'kuli alma v'ez l'chad shinui b'gemara. So again, when it comes to par avodah zara, that comes before the seir avodah zara. Even though, again, the par avodah zara is an oila and the seir avodah zara is a chatos, and the musafin, as we mentioned before, based on the words kamishpatam, so it's possible that that's the case as well. Okay, that is question TA10. TA10. Okay, let's see if TB has a question. No. All right, let's just see the Mishnah, then we're going to stop. Kol chatas shebatayra. Anytime you have a carbon chatas, that's kaimas la shamais. So we talked about how a chatas comes before an oila. The truth is, a chatas comes before an asham as well. Chutz ma'asham etzayra. The exception, as the Mishnah states over here, is when it comes to an asham etzayra, that the din is not like that. Look at Rashi. Im hoyemakrav chatas v'asham. If you're makrav both of them, the chatas comes first, and we, as it says in the Mishnah, she dama nitin al dalad kranais. We know the chatas is brought on all four corners, as well as on the side, as opposed to an asham, which it's not. However, the exception is by an asham mitzayra. Okay, memnei shehu ba al hakasher. So says Rashi, to kasher the mitzayra l'kasher mabias mikdash hilkach chashivasul gabe shetaharat tuyaba. The Tahira process is totally on the bringing of the Asham Mitzayra. So the Asham of the Mitzayra actually will come before a Chatas. Kol Shamash Shematayra Boyin B'nei Shtayim. When it comes to an Asham, it must be 2 years old, which would be called an ayil, a ram. Uboyin B'Kesev Shkolim. And it has to be Kesev Shkolim, 2 silver coins. Chutz Ma'asham Nazir V'Asham Mitzayra. When it comes to those, there's exceptions. Shein Boyin B'nei Shenosan, even when it's less than that age. In Boyin B'Keser Shkom, and the 2 coins are not minimal, is not a requisite. As again, the pasuk says explicitly regarding all Hashamais, Asham Tolei, Asham Gazelis, etc. Asham Shev Charufa, it's all learned that over there. But now there's actually 6 different Ashamais. See if I remember them. Other than the Asham Mitzayra and the Asham Nazir, we also have Asham Be'ilos, Asham Gazelis, Asham Toli, and an Asham Shevcha Charufa. So when it comes to those other 4, the din is that there's a requirement. It has to be an ayil, 2 years old. It has to be Kesev Shkolim, with the exception of these 2. And it says, Dechsiv Keves ben Shenasai. The pasuk says it's beferish when it comes to Asham Nazir, that's ben Shenasai. It's not 2 years old. Meda'ayil ben Beishanim, had to be 2 b'shtei sloim, with 2 coins. Keves ben Shana lav b'shtei sloim. Okay, it's just obviously it's a smaller animal, is not going to cost that same amount of money. Kishem shekaidmin b'hakravasan, just like a chatas comes before the asham in its sacrificing, so too kaidmin b'achilasun. It also comes first when it comes to eating them. So if you have this food, some meat from a chatas and from an asham, then you should eat that first. And Rashi continues, says, a chatas before an asham before a toda before a shlomim before bechor. Shlomim shel emesh. What if you have shlomim that was brought yesterday? Shlomim shel yoim shel emesh kaidmin. So you should eat yesterday's first. This is based on the FIFO inventory method, first in, first out, right? Like the milk, you want to make sure that it doesn't spoil, right? So obviously you want to eat the one which is going to spoil faster. You have a less amount of time. So that's the din. Shlomim shel yoim shel emesh kaidmin. Because again, you have day, night, day to eat a shlomim, day, night, day to eat a shlomim. So if you have one less day, then that's how it works. So it's only when it's the same amount of days, if you will. Everything else is the same. Shlomim shel emesh, shlomim shel yoim. So shel emesh kaidmin, or shel yoim. Shlomim shel emesh chatos. Let's say the shlomim is shel emesh is yesterday, the chatos for asham shel hayoim, and the chatos and asham is for today. So shlomim shel emesh kaidmin. We say the shlomim from yesterday comes first of our mayor. Chatos kaidemes medishi kachi kadashim. So in that situation, you don't have the same amount of time like a shlomim to be able to eat these other things. So therefore, the amount of time is really the same. But because a shlomim is kachim kalim, so better that says the chachamim, the chatas comes first because it's kachim kadashim. The kulam hakohanim rishayin l'shanas b'chilasan. They can do whatever they want with the meat. If they want l'ochan sluyin, shkulim, mavusholin, they could have it cooked, roasted, baked. Lasis l'soichen tavli chulin, and they can use it as a spice. V'tavli truma, divrav shimon. Amer omer lo yita l'soichen tavli truma shelo yavi hatruma de psul. The problem is that if you end up using this, so it's possible that it will end up reaching the level of nicer quicker, and therefore you won't be able to eat it, and therefore you can't take truma, which is something which could always be eaten, and you sprinkle kachim on it, which has a shelf life to it. Then all of a sudden the truma may end up being not usable. So for those reasons, we say you may not use it as tavlin, as a spice. Adkan.